but there's this and there's that and there's that and there's that in the same show, which you wouldn't have seen so much in the past.
Mhm.
So for you to do it confidently is very impressive to me. Unselfconsciously, this is the way your mind thought, and this is the way you dealt with what you were seeing and the materials you were using, and there they are. And there's a real direct honesty about that. That's very impressive, I think.
That is very flattering. It sort of like came about when I thought about this space first. Realizing that this is an Undercroft Gallery that is part of a parish, that is part of a community, that's part of a neighborhood, that's part of the city. And over the past several years, as part of this Heavenly Rest arts initiative, basically, and the various things that we've been doing here during the years with group shows and this and that, and even outside during the Museum Mile Festival, I thought of this space when this idea started, or a year ago or so, to do this solo show. And knowing full well, realizing that this is my first solo exhibition also, that, I was thinking about this. Should this all follow one strict, call it conceptual idea, basically the way you would see it if this was a gallery in Chelsea or anywhere else, basically, where you have a white cube and you fill it with that one theme, basically, and works that resolve very closely often around one theme when you see it that way. And I decided that I had wanted to open this up a little bit and make it a little bit wider, full well realizing that would also open the door to some inconsistencies, let's say, for lack of a better word, maybe. But I wanted to show this, or give this breadth, basically, of works. Also partially just for myself to sort of like have this moment where I could test it and see, because I wasn't able to see this full, everything that's here now on the walls until the moment when everything was up and on the walls. And because it was partially co-curated and partially self-curated in that sense, I wanted to have this sort of like journey experience. That was something that I was interested in. And clearly I am now out of it, basically have come 2 or 3 things that I'm going to follow, that I've already started following in my studio since the opening year, with work that I've continued with, basically, that where things that are 1 or 2 or 3 things that are here, I think like this is very strong. I'm really interested in following this further. Mm-hmm. That was sort of like part of that motivation, really, to have this, to open this up and make this wider.
So you understand why I was raising that point, yeah, right? And we had met numerous times, right? And we were sitting in the green room and he started installing some of the other pieces. And then we started communicating quite regularly, which he's become a very dear friend. And all of them have been. It's really, I'm very thrilled and very honored. But I must say is true, and I hate to repeat myself, but that opening evening, I hadn't even seen half of these other works, right? So I was absorbing them myself as well. And I understand what you were saying. But I think it's very important, and it's ironic when I went back and reread my text the next day, and I suddenly realized that I'd been writing already about his myriad manifestations, right? So in a weird way, that was already there. Mm. And as you're explaining what you wanted to do, and from now on, I think it will go in different directions, right? And go ahead.
I think, you know, if the question came up, let's say I'm asking myself this question, I'm going to answer the question myself, but if I may just indulge in this, about when was that? That was the Tribeca Gallery walk or so last fall or so. I had seen a Spencer Finch as a contemporary conceptual artist show, basically what James Cohen or so gallery on what is it, Walker Street or so.
Wait, it's two galleries.
Right. And you know the beautiful, very powerful neon, conceptual neon installations that he has and that he's known for. And he had this one thing that he juxtaposed, and the one thing that he juxtaposed, and it hasn't left me, is he had done an oil painting on canvas in the actual dimensions of a Claude Monet 1885 or so, Argenteuil, plein air painting, basically, that Monet painted with the river, and you see a couple of sailboats, and it's a lovely sunny afternoon, Sunday afternoon painting. It's lovely. And Spencer Finch basically had, while he was at RISD, and I think he still teaches at RISD, basically, and the original Monet is part of the RISD museum. So it's owned by it's part of the RISD museum collection, the Monet. And he wanted to challenge himself, and he wanted to create an as identical as possible copy of this Monet. And you know, the painting, of course, it's a small painting. It's sort of like it's such a sharp contrast if you think about it at first when you see it next to the neon, next to the very conceptual abstract neon work, basically. But at the same time, it's something that has not left me. And it's that contrast that I feel this is not the first time, has not been the last time since last fall, that I'm drawn to, I seem to be drawn to contrasting experiences that don't have to exclude each other, basically. And that's where those experiences and that sort of like it's not a, and I clearly see myself not as a linear A to B. Actually, as a matter of fact, I don't believe that there's such a thing as a linear A to B in much of anything in this universe. But that's a big statement. But just for me, so I'm another example would be Dana Birnbaum, video installation artist. Basically, I'd seen something at the Hessel Museum at Bard, upstate New York, and her fabulous, very powerful video installations. And in that show, there was a, you know, there was very powerful work that she's well known for, Kiss the Girls, Make Them Cry, for instance, you know, which is also something where I thought, oh, wow, I always love cool titles if something has a cool title. And I try to do that when I have an idea about a title or something very tongue-in-cheek or something, I tend to use that. But there were very simple, plain drawings, basically, that were also on display next to the big video installation in this Birnbaum show. And that is something that tends to interest me, basically, when there's something that is contrasting and that it's different and the same at the same time, if that makes sense.
I have a question to follow up on that. And that is something that you were just talking about in the Rome photographs. I wish we could see them.
Yeah.
They were part of the deck, actually. I think that's the last slide.
Yes, that'd be nice to see the Rome photographs.
It's on the last slide, actually, for those joining us virtually. It's like 5 slides, I think, and it's the last one.
I really like that.
2, 3, 4, 5.
There.
You go. Yeah.
Okay, so you see he's taken photographs, not from a phone, but from a real camera of scenes in Rome. And so normally that's what the painting would be about. It would be about his eye seeing Rome, right? He would be reporting, bringing the city to it, capturing the moment, the light, the composition, and that's what we would share with him. He would be sharing that with him. But you see, he's then painted over it in a very abstract way with this, as you said, it's enamel paint, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So it's handwork on top of this photomechanical, and he did the printing of the photographs himself. So to me, this gets into exactly the both and area that you're talking about. It's both Rome and tourist views, and it's also painting. And it sets up what you spoke of in there, that the paint hides bits of it. We sort of look around it to discover what the subject matter is. In other words, you could walk by these and not necessarily immediately know that it was in fact Rome, right? But you're seized by the question, what do the red blobs mean? You know, what is he doing with this? Is he toying with this? Is it a desecration of the image? What's going on? Well, that's the art that you're bringing. That's the dialogue. That's the interaction that you're bringing to us to discover, right? And to be involved with you in. And so it seemed, I wonder if one gets more weight than the other, or are they equally balanced? Is it ultimately unified? You know, how do you see it?
Yeah, Jim, that's exactly what I have been thinking. This photograph, yeah, good. No. And painted pattern. What that is doing on the photograph? That, if you can explain, I would.
I'm not, I think that, you know, with a work like that a lot of the explanation should actually not be given. It is obviously it's obviously a non-representational, you know, I'm not replicating, let's say, a chair that may be hidden in the dark of the dark corners of that room at that particular villa or palazzo or so, let's say. I'm not adding I'm not painting in a cloud, let's say, into the sky or so, let's just say something very simple. That is not what that is, but it is obviously, it is a way of asking questions, and it's impartially, it's myself asking myself questions. It's an inner dialogue. And of course, the moment someone else looks at the work, it becomes an outer dialogue. It becomes an inner dialogue within you, the viewer, but it's also a dialogue between the artist and his work, and the work and the artist, Heidegger, and the two of us. So there's a hermeneutical thing that's going on, where, of course, you know, to me, if you ask me, I would say, I would answer this, I would say I am mainly a painter. I would describe myself mainly as a painter. Photography in its original meaning means drawing or painting with light. And especially when you do photography, not with a phone or with a digital camera, but with something that's very mechanical and very analog. You have to put the roll of film in. You have to make sure that no light hits the roll of film before you take your first photo. And you have 12 photos. And so you have to sort of like choose what you want to photograph that day. And then you finally develop the roll of film, you take it to a dark room. And after you have the negatives, then you print the photograph basically, and you make a photographic print that is also highly depending on the temperature and the chemicals that you're using and the drying time, etc., and so forth. So you can make the same. You cannot really easily make the same photographic print twice. It's never identical in that sense. They're always originals. And with that already, to me, comes this element of there is an original work that is created, even if the photographic print was not touched. It's highly subjective in a sense, because let's say the upper two, let's say the one at the bottom left is an angel sculpture on the Ponte Sant Angelo, which is right across from Castel Gandolfo. And one of the angels, this one in particular, they're all holding insignia of the crucifixion of Christ. This particular one here shows he's holding the cross. Now, this is a photograph of Rome. This is a photographic depiction of Rome, even of a place that is very famous, that many people will be able to even recognize without a caption, let's say. You know, you can even see some of the rounded outside of the Castel Gandolfo, of the Dell'Angelo in the back. But it is not, because it is it's a black and white photograph. It's not color for that instance. So it's different from the way how we would perceive it if we were on that bridge right now talking about this. So there is already sort of like a layer removed or two. And the painted, the hand sort of like the enamel, the red enamel that goes over it is just another layer. It's just an inner dialogue where I'm engaging with this, but in a very meditative, non-object way in that sense, if that makes sense. Right. Yes.
Question from our folks online.
Excellent.
So I could ask why use red instead of another color on the photographs. Versus the speaking of that palette.
Go ahead.
Well, red is a very powerful color for one thing, and it is very much a high contrast, highest possible contrast color against black and white. If you look, you can't see this in the PDF, but the prints actually are. I printed them on a warm tone paper, so the black is actually a warm black, and the grays, the halftones, are a warm tone, so it's not a cold black. And of course, the red also has a certain vibrancy and luminosity. Somebody had asked me during the reception if the red was blood red, and simply have to say no. I didn't have that associated, but that's just me. You may have that. You know, maybe
I have one other question
Yes,
about the red paint, and that is, do you see it as flat on the surface of the picture plane, or do you see it going into the plane?
I see it flat. I see it flat. I see it like very graphical flat, basically. Flat shapes, but with that hand, with the brush strokes still visible, and partially you can even see through it what's underneath it, what's underneath. So is it adding something, or is it taking something away? Is it revealing, or is it hiding parts of the photograph? And to me, it is almost like in a sense, it becomes something else. It's a painting. To me, I look at it as a painting, not a photograph.
All right, this gets back, if you don't mind me for a minute. When we first started discussing this a few months ago, right? And the works that are in the other room of your fires.
The buildings, right?
The buildings, right? Lucas, I think you have a few of those images too. And I suddenly realized, oh my goodness. So, and we started discussing all this, and I've written about it in my text about your history, right? This is history, right? And then you took those photographs you had taken earlier and then painted on them. But those other works that are in the green room, right, of places you live with the fires. And then it was all about going back to these other and bringing back your history or for earlier motifs, right? And you hadn't painted on those till later,
Right.
right? And that's what he was telling me. And then the works that are in the other room here, I'm sorry, all of you can't see these, of places he lived earlier in New York, which had fires. And, right, so it's all about rediscovering some of, and that gets into some of
History and story. Yes. I would like to just, I have just another, just one other sort of like formal comment actually that I remembered about the photographs that may be why I am approaching work in this way sometimes or oftentimes is it must have to do with the Academy of Fine Arts in Stuttgart in Germany that I went to is, you know, had whatever these different master's programs, and you were a painter or you were an architect or you were a graphic designer or whatnot, photography or what else, sculpture, etc. But it was in that sense very open with very few dividing walls in between those different departments. So although I focused on certain things, I was always interested in this wider approach, basically. So
embrace.
I would spend time with Adolfo Natalini, who came as a very futuristic architect from Milan to Stuttgart as an adjunct to give lectures or something. But I always made sure to join those, although I never studied architecture. But that was something that I wanted to be part of this. And of course, I would think, or Joseph Kossuth came over from New York and would give lectures and things like that, and even had an academic chair for a while, basically. So that influenced me, I guess, because I always thought this as an enrichment and not as a watering down. So I thought that you know, things that juxtapose, things that are outside of, let's say, a perceived understanding of what, let's say, in a more academic or traditional sense, should be inside of something, and there are things that are outside of that something, and I like tearing those walls down, basically, which is why it also leads to.
Definitely.
And I think that shows up in all your work. I mean, you're free to do that. You're free to make very strange juxtapositions.
You know, if this was about there is an aspect, you beautifully made that connection when you talked about music also and poetry, and I believe strongly also that those different arts basically don't have to necessarily be so compartmentalized. So I love listening to music while I paint, for instance. You know, that's something that then, of course, influences or sort of like seeps into the sort of like the what the work feels like, maybe, or so sometimes, ideally. You know, that's something that can become visible. It's just tools, whether it's works on paper or whether it's oil on wood or whether it's photography or whatnot. You know, these are just different instruments in a sense.
Roland, what music do you like the variety of different types?
Steve, when I and the work that is these abstract panels, basically, that's when I did when I painted the abstract panels, basically that are part of this, I listened a lot to Brian Eno, basically, and ambient music, that kind of stuff, Tangerine Dream. But this is also stuff, or these are pieces that I've listened to, whatever, 40 years ago already or so, you know, so it has this, at the same time, memory when I listen to this. I also listen, just like with the photography, I love putting vinyl records on a turntable and putting the the arm down, and including all the little scratches and all these side noises that come with that, basically, and the fact that every 20 minutes you have to lift the arm again and either switch to side B or play it from the beginning or whatever. I love that too. So these sort of like analog mechanical things. And then I also wanted to say that some of the earliest memories that I have revolving around art are long, many hour-long walks with my dad in the landscape that I grew up in, which is Holland, Belgium, Rhineland region, very flat like a plate, like a table top, with much sky, and then very little flat landscape below it, just in the Jacob van Heustal paintings, let's say. But talking while walking for 4 or 5 hours at a time, basically talking about and listening to my dad talking about classical music. It could have been Brahms, or it could have been Wagner or Beethoven or so. And so in my memory, from very earliest memories that I still have, that I cherish, that is part of that, basically. And I have a memory of walking through the Müller Museum in Arnhem, sculpture park, and beautiful museum. They have wonderful Van Goghs also in their museum collection. But they have this sculpture park where they have Richard Serra and Klaus Oldenburgs and whatnot, outside, basically. And I remember this was like in the late 60s when the first Richard Serra was installed. It was already rusty from day one, basically. But I remember this, and I remember approaching this and so those things, but I was just little and talking about classical music at the same time, or then going to a concert at night, basically, with my dad or with my parents. And so those things to me are intertwined, and I can't separate them. I don't know if that answers the question, which music, but.
And I know you wanted to talk about this more towards the end, but I just wondered if that can lead into the spiritual dimension and space. How that evoked that for you or provoked it? Well, you both have been long or lifelong or very long time members here of our beautiful Church of the Heavenly Rest, right? This is a very, I came to Heavenly Rest because I was looking specifically 8 years ago, specifically for a place that did not just offer a church parish, basically, but at the same time also had an arts initiative and a strong music and arts program, basically. And I loved that from day one. I actually sought that out for this particular reason. So much so that, this is not in my immediate walking distance neighborhood where I live, but I have to trek here, and love it. And we the whole family loves it. And, I think that across everything that that Heavenly Rest is doing, has been doing, that it has provided such a beautiful space and community and family. Really, that's how I feel it. It's become another family for me. And sometimes this was a big deal, so to speak, for me, with lots of preparing and months and months of creating work for this. But even an afternoon museum mile, we have all these beautiful museums here on Fifth Avenue next to us, right next door to us. And here we are, and it's a church and it's a parish, and yet every year, basically, we create something that is arts programming, basically, that we put out that make many people happy and put many smiles on people's faces. And that's something to me that has its practical spirituality.
Please tell everyone what you were telling everyone at the Cooper Hewitt members party the other day when
What?
you pointed across the road? All right. The other day, last week, was the members party at Cooper Hewitt. And I invited them to come. I'm a member. And everybody was delighted who works there and everybody and lots of people. I said to them, tell them where your exhibition is. And we stood in the garden at Cooper Hewitt and he pointed his finger across the street and people came up to me and I got emails the next day. Said, this was so magical. He could stand there in the garden at Cooper Hewitt and point across to Heavenly Rest and see my exhibitions over there. I have to tell you, it was pretty magical. And so everybody from the museum's planning to come. So
Yes, it was. You know, and I think there's this, to me, you know, this was just the moment before the pandemic when Jim, when you curated this wonderful small group show where you invited friends, artist friends, to do
that's
Spirit
right.
in Creation.
Right.
And I think that title, Spirit in Creation, is sums it up so beautifully. This is really what this is about.
Right. You did that right before.
And that works inside of the artist, basically, during the art making. Basically, it's a very personal, intimate experience, of course, creating something, whatever that is, whether it's painting or sculpture or photography or music or poetry. But then there's that wonderful magical moment when you put it on a wall or something and that dialogue starts. And it starts a life of its own, right? It's like really, like you said, you know, you look at something and it's like, what does that actually mean? What does it tell me? And it's there, you know, the things that it invokes.
You talked a lot about your different subject matters or different types of media that you're using in all of your work. I'm sort of wondering, you go to your studio in the morning, how do you decide I'm going to work on something political, I'm going to work on something that comes from memory, I'm going to work on something that's more social commentary? How do you, is it just whatever is inspiring you that day? Is it practical? How do you decide where to take your art in the moment?
That's a great question. I would think that, you know, half of the time inspiration comes from things that I see, whether it's going to another show, to another gallery, to, you know, seeing other artists' work, really. And I would say that one of my motivation, my key motivations of deciding that I wanted to live in New York City, leaving Europe and moving to New York, had been that, you know, here's a place that will always provide me with fresh inspiration and new things, you know. So that's one thing. But then, you know, you can sort of like identify or work on an idea, and you do one thing first, of course. You know, it's like this painting here of this. It's called The Listing. So if you look it up, it's not called a crocodile skin bag, but it's called The Listing because it's a painting of a social media listing that features this crocodile skin bag. And there's at that moment, when I had the idea to paint this, of course, it was in context to some of the other, you know, branded things and luxury retail, et cetera, and so forth. And it sort of like became sort of like this key painting for this particular show. But now I'm working on two. It sort of like triggered this idea to sort of like do more paintings and create a series of this. So there's going to be more paintings of bags and listings of bags in the future and other things, other beautiful things. And so I think the work itself is inspiration then to go in certain directions and follow that. And there is no, in that sense, programmatical planning in that sense. It's like I don't sit down and say like, okay, next year I'm going to be doing this and this and this. I like sort of like being inspired and surprised by what I like and then follow that. I think that's to use a term here of this that fits, is that to me is a luxury also that I indulge in that. Cool. That was a good question. Yes, Lucas.
The question, which is you sort of answered it, but from Monica, and do you have a favorite medium? So maybe I'll add to the question. If your process is intuitive and you work through the pieces that you make, and maybe that leads you to another one, maybe highlight what you just did. Another favorite discovery is you're making something that led you to want to make more of it.
Yeah, that's a cool question also. I would think again that takes me to actually name two other artists that I really have always admired. And one would be Robert Rauschenberg, basically in the way how Rauschenberg worked very broadly with any which materials basically found and anticipated and not so much anticipated, and combines and all of those things, and that element of experimentation that I really like, and that I seek also. I seek that. I want to see how that enamel paint sort of like, in quotation marks, goes wrong using the wrong brush or using just my finger or a piece of cloth, and how, that sort of like, and also I would say, in a way, I grew up a little bit around Joseph Beuys, and literally, figuratively, and literally speaking, in the sense that through my dad, basically, who was friends with the Van der Grintens, and Van der Grintens being the largest collectors of Joseph Beuys' work, basically, and that resulted in a museum in the Rhineland region, which is called Castle Meuland, where the collection is now being held, and other involvements there. And of course, Beuys was also at the Academy in Düsseldorf, where he taught, and then he was politically involved for a little bit, at least, with, at the very first steps of the Green Party movement in West Germany at that time, late 70s, and then through also the work that he did for a number of documentas, basically with the oaks and the piles of stone, or there's some of them which are in Chelsea, I think, across from Dia Foundation, right? So that and if you know anything about Beuys, you know that he's never probably taken a 16 by 24 canvas or something and to properly paint with a vanishing point or whatnot, but would have immediately turned that around and done something with the back of it or whatnot. But it's that, and with that also comes a little bit of a consciousness, basically, about how art can also be, for lack of a better word, political, but can have, it can have this where you have like a piece of poetry or something. It can trigger emotions and inside feelings, but it can also make an outside statement.
Transformative.
It can be transformative. Thank you. Yes. And that is something that I'm interested in, if that answers the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica.
I have a question about the future. And that is, you've done several series that we can see here, and they feel complete to me, each one. Do you see yourself 10 or 20 years down the road being able to continue one of these series, or will you have ongoing new series?
The there's going to be hopefully a lot of new work that is not on the horizon yet, but I'm sure of it. But the photographic work and working with photography and painting is something that I'm deeply interested in, and I started that actually almost 20 years ago. The work that's here, that's part of those 15 or 16 painted photographs are all current 2023. But that is something that reaches back 20 years or so, and I'm very interested in, and I started basically with basically larger size photographs, basically, and painting there, and what happens then if it's a larger canvas, the photograph or the print becomes a larger canvas. Something that I'm very interested in, and I'm certain that that's not going to leave me, because it's also that photography component that I like so much personally. I just love working with these mechanical, these little machines, right? Unpredictable machines. It's the opposite of AI, maybe. I don't know, but
very much.
you know, I want to and I think, Lucas, this was one of the slides also. There were marble squares that I had used for this. It's right here on display, and it's in there. It's the one. It's a column to the very left here on the slide. There's like a total of 8 or so, where I used Carrara marble from Italy, from Carrara, honed. They're only 12 by 12 inches here. And I spray painted. I used spray paint. That's the branded colors of these. Of, let's say it's Christian Dior white, it's Prada, it's Chanel, right? It's sort of like, again, like with or similar to the painted over photographs. It's a violation of a sense, of a sort. It's in a way a violation of this very pristine, immaculate marble. That's even honed and polished, basically, so even refined on the surface. That reaches back in art history, of course, you know, Michelangelo, just to name one. That is being spray painted, and spray paint, of course, has this connotation of graffiti. Of this is something that violates, but it makes a statement also at the same time. Act, yes, it's an act. And especially in those. In this work, where the spray paint is applied in such a way that it actually even leaves and it starts to drool. So it's not the pretty, clean, sprayed over surface, but there's another sort of like element or notion actually that's applied there. And is it more or is it less? And now that I'm looking at, once they came up here and I looked at them here on display, I thought, you know, I need to make those things bigger. I want to work on much bigger marble slabs, and I want to see them in 6 feet or 8 feet or whatever, much larger size. And what happens when you work on a much bigger canvas, so to speak, is, of course, you work differently. You know, so that is something that I'm going to continue with. It's another thing that I'm very interested in now.
How about,
I'm reading, and this person is citing Kandinsky, who we all adore.
I'll read that. That's from John.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for pointing out, Elizabeth. Well, since the exhibition is in a church basement gallery, and since you answered this a little bit earlier, I think we talked about it, we'll go back to it. What is the difference between showing in a church-sponsored space and a secular gallery? Kandinsky wrote The Spiritual and Art. Can you comment on your present situation regarding spirituality and art, especially with the West being spoken of in decline?
Oh, that's
Well, Lucas,
provocative.
you can speak also, you know.
Lucas, you can add another hour or two to this, right?
Yeah, I mean, Lucas, you're in charge of this program here. We all work with you. I mean, come on.
I love the Kandinsky
So do I. So do you.
reference
We
here.
all do.
On just a couple of blocks down, basically in the Met is one of my favorite paintings.
Guggenheim. I think you mean the Guggenheim.
There is the Garden of Eden in the Met.
Yes,
is a
I know, but the
fabulous-
Guggenheim is one block down who adores Kandinsky. too.
Yes, also, yes.
So,
And
there you go.
Kandinsky had also written about painting and music.
Very much.
So there is a duality that may be a trinity, actually, of painting, music, and spirituality there in Kandinsky's case.
No
And
question.
I think earlier I said, how this is a very precious space that is different from a white cube gallery or so, or commercial gallery, in that there's an additional layer here, or additional layers. For instance, the audience, I would say, it's typically that, if you go to Chelsea to visit on 24th Street or so, some show or something, that's a deliberate planned, I'm going to go and check out these couple of exhibitions, or I'm going to attend this reception or something, or I'm going to the museum to see this or that exhibition. And here, of course, we get that, but we also have a lot of people that we find in this space that did not intend to look or were planning to see any art, let's say. And that's and that is across also different age groups and, demographic groups and whatnot. And that is also something that's very interesting. So this ivory tower versus to me, it feels a little more, I don't know, democratic in a way. That's not the right word. Egalitarian,
Open.
maybe open. Open is good.
And non-commercial.
Non-commercial, right?
I feel that's really
It's a big
important.
dimension.
Yeah.
It's really important these days, Right?
Kandinsky is also interesting in that there is a connection, of course, with Bauhaus. Kandinsky was one of the artists involved in the Bauhaus movement, just like Paul Klee and others. But Kandinsky taught at Bauhaus until Bauhaus was no more. Yeah, and but so Kandinsky clearly also had this idea that spirituality, just like art making, is not something that needs to stay inside, but that can be shared and that grows when it is being shared, which is one of those experiences I think that we have here all the time, basically, that we're growing through all this beautiful programming that's offered here.
We probably have time for one more question, and we'll probably have to wrap.
I have a question. The previous question brought up the decline of the against. I know this is subject Elizabeth, so I'm interested in the urging of Eastern art and Western, and what we can learn from both. And I don't know if the answer, but I'm kind of exploring some of those subjects. Do you think about Eastern art? Is that maybe just floating around there a little bit, or do you think about the relationship?
Much more today now than 20 years ago or so, or even growing up. The sort of like education and all of that, the whole sort of like system basically of primary and secondary education in Western Europe, I think that's fair to say it this way, was very much honed in on the West, basically, and one of the wonderful things basically is that this is I'm growing. I've noticed myself that I am growing much more being interested also in, well, no, this is not just the East and the West, but there have been, since whatever Marco Polo and before, many relationships, basically, sometimes forced, sometimes deliberate, voluntary. And there is a tremendous amount, a wealth of things that I'm talking about just about myself, that I want to learn, and it's a treasure trove of many doors that I want to open still. Absolutely.
And we, in the last few months when we were working together, right? So I could write that text, we discussed it a lot, and I provoked him. As you well know, since he and I have talked about it a lot, right? And Lucas too, right? And we talked about it a lot. I didn't get into my essay. I was happy with Heidegger because Heidegger was influenced, right? And so I felt that in getting to synergism and different manifestations of mediums, somehow there's some of that Zen, the other elements. And we talked about it quite a bit, right? So I didn't want to get so obvious as sometimes I have been as a historian in Asian art, but we definitely did. Yeah. Oh, and I should bring up a few things. I was observing two quick things, if you don't mind, just to show that some things in the world perhaps are evolving. Barnes & Noble opened a new bookshop in the neighborhood. Okay, so I stopped by today. It was opened yesterday. 800 people went in the first hour. I stopped by today. It was amazing. After physiotherapy or before physiotherapy, so many children, teenagers, they had LPs, by the way. That's what I want to tell you. I was so impressed. So much Asian art, so much poetry. So I got to get a book of yours. All right. Second point, Oppenheimer. I am not a big fan. I've worked on Hiroshima a lot with the Hersey family and a lot of projects in Japan when I was at Japan, and still today. You know, he studied Sanskrit. And that's what's coming up in this. I'm just bringing up that sometimes you don't know what other beings are doing. And we cannot all, and I've been always very difficult about labeling, stop talking about the West. But then I suddenly realized that a lot of other beings have influences that cross all these boundaries. I just wanted to say, I need to be much kinder. And as His Holiness told me years ago, and understand that we all have these influences. That's all I wanted to say.
Roland, Susan, Jim, and thank you for everyone for coming this evening, and to everyone online. Sorry I'm not on camera. And have a good night.
Thank you, Lucas.
Thank you, Ruth. Good job.